Story title: Triplets chain their parents to stop the divorce. It was a humid evening in Lagos, the kind where the air seemed thick with unspoken words and unresolved tensions. The city never really slept. Its heartbeat carried in the rush of yellow danfos swerving through traffic, the chorus of vendors calling out prices in the market, and the scent of roasted corn mixing with exhaust fumes. Inside one modest home in Suralere, however, the city's restless rhythm was drowned out by silence, heavy, suffocating silence that filled the rooms like smoke after a fire. Michael sat at the edge of the bed, his tie loose and shirt creased, and his eyes distant, fixed on the tile floor. Ruth stood by the window, her hands clutching the curtain, her body tense, her mind replaying years of hurt in fragments that cut sharper with every breath. They had once promised forever, sworn under the Lagos sun, and before God that nothing would break them. But promises are fragile things when life presses down with poverty, temptation, betrayal, and the relentless search for dignity in a city that devoured the weak. Their triplets, Daniel, David, and Deborah, watched them in silence from a hallway. 10 years old, 3 bodies bound by the same womb, 3 souls shaped by the cracks in their parents' marriage. They had seen too much of their age. Whispered arguments late at night, doors slammed with the force of broken trust, their mother crying in the kitchen when she thought they were asleep, their father sleeping in the parlor for weeks without saying why. And now, they had overheard the unthinkable. Their parents were going to court in the morning. A divorce. The word itself was heavy, strange, terrifying. It felt like an axe about to split their world in two. Daniel, the eldest by mere minutes, clenched his small fists. He had always been the leader, the one who shielded his siblings from bullies at school, who pretended to be brave when darkness scared them at night. David, more sensitive and thoughtful, felt tears burn his eyes. He was the one who noticed a quiver in their mother's lips, the weariness in their father's gait, the little details that told bigger stories. Deborah, fiery and outspoken, whispered, "We can't let them do it. If they separate, our family is finished." She said it with child's absolute certainty, as though her voice alone could stop the world from turning. But behind her defiance was fear, raw and pulsing. That night, the triplets huddled together in their room, the bare bulb above them flickering like an uncertain heartbeat. "We need a plan," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. "If we let them go to court tomorrow, they'll never come back together again." David hugged his pillow tightly. "But what can we do? They're adults. We're just kids." Deborah's eyes lit with mischief and determination. "Then we'll do something they don't expect. We'll force them to stay together, at least long enough to remember what they're about to lose." The plan formed in whispers and encouraged that only desperation can forge. The triplets had seen enough Nollywood films to know that dramatic gestures could change everything. They decided to act before dawn, before the court papers could be signed, before love was drowned completely by bitterness. The air that night was restless with thunder, as though the heavens themselves sensed what was about to unfold. At dawn, while their parents slept in separate rooms, Ruth curled on the far edge of the bed in the master bedroom, Michael sprawled on the couch in the sitting room. The triplets moved like tiny conspirators. Daniel carried the rope they had hidden away from the backyard. David tiptoed with a padlock they had begged off a neighbor weeks ago, pretending it was for a school project. Deborah, with the boldness of commander, led them straight into their parents' room where Michael had returned out of habit in the early hours. The act itself was both clumsy and astonishing. Before their parents could fully register what was happening, little hands had fastened their wrists together with rope, securing them to each other and then to the metal bed frame. Michael shouted, "What is this madness?" His deep voice boomed with anger, but the children didn't flinch. Ruth gasped, her first instinct to protect the children for what seemed like play gone wrong, until she realized the determination in their eyes. "Children, untie us this instant," she ordered, her tone sharp. But underneath it was something else, something unsettled. Daniel stepped forward, chest puffed out though his knees trembled. "We won't. Not until you promise you won't go to court today." His words came out shaky but resolute. David added quickly, "We can't lose our family. We won't let you throw it away." Deborah, eyes blazing, shouted, "If you want freedom, you'll have to talk to each other first." We're not letting you destroy us." The room froze in stunned silence. The audacity of it left Michael and Ruth speechless for a moment. Then Michael pulled against the rope, his strength making the bed creak. But the knots were tight, tighter than anyone expected from children their age. He cursed under his breath. Ruth's eyes filled with tears, not from the rope biting into her wrist, but from realization of what desperation had driven her children to do. Hours passed. The parents argued, at first at the children, then at each other. Old wounds spilled like floodwater breaching a dam. Michael accused Ruth of never believing in him, of shaming him when his business ventures failed, of withdrawing her warmth when he needed her most. Ruth shot back, her voice sharp with years of suppressed pain, accusing him of neglect, of choosing pride and other women over his family, of crushing her spirit with his silence. The children sat nearby, their small faces tight with worry, but they refused to undo the knots. "Talk it out," Daniel whispered fiercely whenever the argument threatened to fade into cold silence. "Say what you've never said." David urged with quiet urgency. Deborah stood guard like a soldier, her hands on her hips, daring either parent to dismiss them. By afternoon, the house felt like both a battlefield and a confessional. Outside, Lagos roared on, horns blaring, hawkers chanting, neighbors gossiping. Inside, the chained couple were stripped bare by truth. The more they spoke, the more layers of resentment peeled back, revealing not just wounds but the memories of why they had once chosen each other. Ruth remembered the Michael who had walked her home from choir practice in the rain, holding an umbrella that barely covered them both, but shielding her as though she were precious. Michael remembered the Ruth who had nursed him through malaria when they were still courting, feeding him pepper soup with her own hands. These memories floated into their anger like fragile lanterns, refusing to be extinguished. But just when the children thought hope was being rekindled, Michael dropped a bombshell. His affair with Clara, the secretary. He admitted it, his voice thick with shame and pride tangled together. Ruth's world cracked open anew. She had suspected, but hearing it confirmed was like swallowing glass. Her sobs tore through the room, and even the triplets, who had never fully understood the whispers, stared in horror. Deborah shouted, "Daddy, how could you?" Michael could not meet their eyes. The confession spiraled into a darker abyss. Ruth spoke of nights she had cried herself to sleep, of humiliation she had hidden from the children, of the emptiness that had grown inside her. Michael spoke of his fear of failure, of watching his friends rise while he sank, of grasping at Clara not for love but for validation. The air grew heavy, thick with shame, betrayal, and brokenness. Yet, in that furnace of pain, something else happened. The children refused to let go. "If you must fight, fight it all out now," Daniel said with trembling defiance. "But you're not leaving this house until you remember us." David quietly placed their family photo, the one from happier days at Tarkwa Bay Beach, on the bed between them. In it, Ruth's laughter was unrestrained, Michael's smile unburdened, and 3 toddlers grinned with sand in their hair. It was a reminder that beyond the betrayal and bitterness, there had been love. The night fell again, this time with rain lashing against the tin roof. Inside, the chained couple sat exhausted, their voices hoarse, their faces streaked with tears. The children, curled in a corner, refused to sleep until they heard something more than anger. Ruth finally whispered, her voice barely audible, "I don't know if I can forgive you, Michael." Michael's reply was just as raw. I don't know if I can forgive myself." And that was where healing began. Not with denial, not with forced smiles, but with the brutal honesty of broken people daring to speak truth in the presence of the children who still believed in them. The next morning came not with peace, but with the groan of a city that never paused for broken families. Lagos rose in its usual chaos. The honk of impatient buses, the chatter of market women, the smell of akra frying by the roadside, the drone of radios already arguing politics. Inside the house, however, time felt suspended. Michael and Ruth were still bound, not by rope anymore. The children had finally loosened the knots after extracting shaky promises, but by the fragile, inescapable weight of what had been said in the night. They sat opposite ends of bed, wrists sore, hearts raw, their 3 children watching them like hawks guarding treasure. Daniel stood at the door, as though expecting either parent to bolt. David clutched a photo he had placed the night before, fingers pressing against the glass, unwilling to set it down. Deborah hovered in restless energy, afraid silence might harden into finality. Michael rubbed his temple, his pride still wrestling with shame. You children, you shouldn't have done this. Tying your parents like criminals. His voice lacked conviction. Ruth shot him a glance that was sharp but tired. They did what you and I should have done years ago. They forced us to face the truth. Her words hung heavy in the air. For years, they had danced around truths, masking pain with silence, pretending their wounds were not festering. Now the children had stripped them of that pretense. The day passed in slow motions. Ruth moved to the kitchen, her hands trembling as she prepared simple yam porridge. Michael followed awkwardly, his presence in that space unusual. They ate in silence, the children watching every bite as though waiting for an invisible reconciliation to appear between spoonfuls. But none came, only a fragile ceasefire, an uneasy truce. By evening, neighbors had begun to notice. Rumors had already swirled that Ruth and Michael were heading for divorce court, and the sight of their children clinging tightly to both parents as they walked to the small roadside kiosk for bread sent whispers through the street. Maybe they've reconciled, someone said. Maybe not, another replied. Legos thrived on stories, and this family had just become one. But peace is never simple. Clara lingered in the background, unseen but not absent. She sent Michael messages he ignored, her words oscillating between pleas of love and venomous threats. She knew about the court date, knew about Ruth's suspicions, and knew that Michael's weakness was still her weapon. One evening, while Ruth was bathing Deborah, Clara called. Daniel picked up the phone by accident. The voice on the other end was smooth, mocking. "Tell your father I'm waiting. He can't hide behind his children forever." Daniel froze, anger boiling in his small chest. He slammed the phone down without a word. When he confronted his father, Michael could not meet his eyes. "It's finished," Michael muttered. But the children had learned not to trust promises easily. "Then prove it," Deborah challenged, her eyes blazing. Michael had no answer. Days turned into weeks. The court papers lay unsigned on the shelf, gathering dust. Michael began to linger longer at home, though tension remained thick between him and Ruth. Slowly, painfully, conversations returned. Not about love, not yet, but about bills, school fees, groceries. Practical words, but words nonetheless. Ruth, though wounded, carried herself with quiet dignity. She rose before dawn to clean office buildings in Victoria Island, scrubbing floors that smelled of imported perfume and air conditioning, while her twins helped with chores at home. She bore her pain silently, except when it slipped into her eyes at night. One Sunday morning, they all went to church together for the first time in months. The congregation noticed. Ruth sang softly, her voice breaking on certain notes. Michael stood beside her, stiff and uncertain, but he was there. The triplets beamed. For a moment, it felt like a glimpse of the family they used to be. But storms rarely pass without testing the strength of what remains. Clara made her move boldly. She arrived at Ruth's workplace one afternoon, wearing sharp heels and sharper words. She cornered Ruth in the cleaning closet, the scent of bleach filling the air. "You think you won because he's back under your roof?" Clara sneered. "Michael is mine. He comes to me when he needs to feel like a man. You're nothing but the bitter shadow of his failure." Ruth's hands trembled around the mop handle. She wanted to scream, to fight, but she held her composure. Her reply was calm, steady. "If you truly had him, you wouldn't need to come here and announce it. A woman who is secure does not chase another shadow." Her words cut sharper than Clara's mockery. Clara hissed, her mask slipping. "We'll see how long you last." When Ruth returned home, she said nothing, but the children saw the weariness in her shoulders. Daniel followed her into the kitchen. "Was it her?" he asked quietly. Ruth's eyes filled with tears she had fought to hold back. She nodded. Daniel, though only 10, placed a small hand on hers. "Don't let her break us, Mama. Please." The weight of his words pressed into her like scripture. That night, Ruth stood in the yard under the Lego stars, whispering a prayer she had almost forgotten how to say. She prayed not for Michael's love to return, but for strength, for herself, for her children, for whatever tomorrow demanded. Michael, restless and guilty, watched from the window. For the first time, he saw not the woman who nagged or doubted him, but the woman who had carried his family on her back while he stumbled, and shame clawed at his chest. The climax came weeks later, in a boardroom rather than a bedroom. Michael had been invited to pitch a contract to a wealthy businessman whose company could revive his struggling career. Clara appeared at that meeting, deliberately, knowing Michael's vulnerability. She smiled sweetly, as though she held his fate in her hands. Ruth arrived moments later, not by accident, but because she had insisted on accompanying him, unwilling to let Clara hold that space uncontested. The air in the boardroom was tense. The businessman, Mr. Adewale, watched with sharp eyes as Ruth calmly presented Michael's proposal, her voice steady, her dignity intact. Clara attempted to undermine, whispering rumors, but Ruth countered with facts and poise. By the end of the meeting, Adewale shook Ruth's hand. "You are the strength of this family," he said simply. The contract was signed. Clara stormed out. Humiliated, her hold over Michael shattered. In that moment, Michael realized what he had almost destroyed. The quiet power of the woman beside him, the unwavering loyalty of his children, the fragile but unbroken thread of family. That evening, he gathered his children in the parlor. His voice trembled as he said, "Your mother is the strongest person I know. I was blind, but you three forced me to see. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life earning it." Ruth sat silently, tears slipping down her cheeks. The triplets huddled close, wrapping their arms around both parents. For the first time in a long while, laughter returned, small, uncertain, but real. It did not erase the past. Scars remained. Trust had to be rebuilt brick by brick. But in the raw honesty of betrayal and the stubborn love of children, a new beginning had taken root. And so, in a small home in Surulere, amid the chaos of Lagos, a family scarred but still standing found a fragile peace. Not the fairy tale ending of movies, but the quiet, imperfect victory of real life. Night in Lagos had a way of pressing itself into the soul. The hum of generators, the wail of distant sirens, the barking of stray dogs, all combined into a kind of melancholy symphony. In Michael and Ruth's home, however, the silence was heavier than the sounds outside. After the boardroom confrontation and Clara's humiliating retreat, there was no triumphant celebration, no sudden flood of joy. Instead, there was exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that comes after storms, where the wreckage must be faced, counted, and slowly repaired. Michael sat alone in the parlor, staring at his hands. Those hands had once been quick with dreams, eager to build businesses, to make a name for himself. Now, they trembled with the memory of choices he could not undo. He thought of Clara's smile, her promises, her flattery. He thought of the nights he had believed her lies over his wife's quiet truth. He thought of his children tying him to bed, their small voices demanding he face himself. Shame and gratitude warred inside him. Ruth, meanwhile, was in the kitchen, washing the plates from dinner. Her motions were mechanical, her face unreadable. The contract had given Michael a chance at stability again, but stability was not the same as trust. Trust was a bridge she was not sure she could walk across yet. She heard his footsteps behind her, but did not turn. "Ruth," he said quietly. She continued scrubbing. "Ruth, please. Look at me." She stopped, turned slowly, the water dripping from her hands onto the floor. He looked smaller somehow, this man she once admired for his boldness, this man who had nearly destroyed her with his pride. His eyes were red. His shoulders sagged. "I don't have excuses," he said. "I only have regret. And I only have a promise that I will never betray this family again. Not in words, not in actions, not even in thoughts." Her eyes searched his face, weighing the sincerity. She wanted to believe him. Part of her did. But part of her remembered nights of loneliness, whispers of betrayal, the hollow ache of feeling unwanted. "Promises are easy, Michael," she said softly. "It's the keeping that costs everything." He nodded. "Then let me pay. Every day. For as long as it takes." From the doorway, the triplets listened silently. Deborah, unable to hold her tongue, marched in. Daddy, don't just talk. Show us. Every single day. Mama deserves more than words. Ruth tried to hush her, but Michael surprised them both by kneeling in front of Deborah. You're right, he said. Your mother deserved the world, and I gave her ashes. But I'm asking for a chance to rebuild, even if it takes the rest of my life. Deborah blinked, caught between her anger and her love. Finally, she threw her arms around his neck. Then, don't you dare break us again. That night, for the first time in months, Michael and Ruth shared the same bed. Not as lovers, not even fully as husband and wife, but as two broken people willing to try again. The children fell asleep in their own room with lighter hearts, whispering to each other in the dark about how maybe, just maybe, their plan had worked. But healing was not a straight road. Weeks stretched into months, and though laughter returned in small bursts, arguments still flared. Sometimes Ruth flinched at his touch, memories of betrayal rising unbidden. Sometimes Michael's pride resurfaced, making him defensive. Yet, unlike before, they did not retreat into silence. They argued, yes, but they also listened, and the children, wise beyond their years, often reminded them of the bond they were fighting to save. One afternoon, the family visited Tarqua Bay again, the beach where the old photo had been taken. The sand was hot beneath their feet, the waves restless and wild. Ruth sat on a mat, watching as Michael played football with the children, his laughter ringing out, unguarded. For a moment, she saw not the man who had broken her, but the man she had once loved, and her chest ached with both pain and possibility. Later, as the sun dipped into the horizon, painting the sky orange and gold, Michael sat beside her. He didn't reach for her hand. He simply said, "Thank you for giving me another chance to sit here with you." She glanced at him, her lips trembling. "Don't thank me yet. We're still on the journey." He nodded, accepting her caution, cherishing her honesty. The children built sandcastles nearby, their laughter mixing with the roar of the waves. For them, this was victory, not perfect, not fairy tale, but real. Months later, the family gathered at church for Thanksgiving service. Ruth, dressed in simple Ankara, sang louder than she had in years. Michael stood beside her, his arm gently resting on her back. The triplets swayed in the choir, their voices high and sweet. Neighbors whispered about how close they had come to divorce, about how the children had chained them together, about how some families find their way back from the edge. But Ruth did not care about whispers anymore. She had discovered a strength in herself she had never known. She had faced betrayal and survived it. She had learned that love was not about blind trust, but about resilience, boundaries, and daily choices. And Michael, humbled, reshaped, had learned that true manhood was not in conquest or pride, but in service, in humility, in devotion. As the final hymn ended, Ruth took his hand, not out of obligation, not out of pity, but out of a fragile, growing willingness to walk with him again. His eyes met hers, filled with tears. And for the first time in years, she believed that maybe, just maybe, they could write a new chapter together. The triplets, watching from the choir stand, beamed with joy. They had chained their parents to save a family. What held them now was stronger than rope. It was truth. It was struggle. It was imperfect, stubborn love. And in that imperfection, there was hope.